Hello, my name is Shantae Williams, and today I'll be discussing Chapter 13 with you, Quantitative Descriptive Designs. Now, quantitative descriptive designs are used to describe, explain, and predict phenomenon. These designs can be used to rule out the existence of causal relationships or to suggest causal connections and to test theories. Uh, Now, there are a few different types of quantitative descriptive research. The first of which is survey research or epidemiological research. The second is variable centered research. And the third is person centered research. Now, the first of these, survey research designs. Surveys are generally used to document the frequency of a variable or the nature of a variable within a population. They come in many different forms, whether it be questionnaires, interviews, mail or online surveys. And surveys are really self-report. They're really simple way to collect data. Now, when we talk about epidemiological research, what these are surveys, but they're specifically looking at health factors. So factors that relate to health or diseases, and looking at the patterns, causes, and the effects of those health issues within a certain population. Now, there are some design issues to consider when you're looking at using a survey or epidemiological research design. The first of which is that your research questions are designed for a specific population. However, unlike some other types of research designs, you don't get to form the groups. So you're not manipulating who is in your sample as much as you would with another type of research design. Your survey is given to everyone. And so that's something to think about when using these types of designs. The second thing is that it is important that the items used in surveys have strong face validity and internal reliability. Um, and also, it's important when you're thinking about the validity and reliability of these items is any cultural and language factors that may change that for certain populations. So being sensitive to culture and language in selecting the items for surveys is very important. In terms of your data collection, you want to make sure that your survey sample is representative of the population that you're looking to research. Sometimes it can be difficult to get participants to respond to surveys, and many times in this day and age you're using online samples, but there is some evidence that shows that there might be some characteristics of online samples and people who would complete a survey online that may not be indicative of the general population. So that is something to take into account with surveys. Another thing is when you are analyzing your data, you need to make sure that your sample is adequate and representative, and also take time to look at differences between respondents and non-respondents. Perhaps a certain type of person is not going to respond to your survey. And if you're finding that to be the case, that may take away from your findings. It may make those findings less valid, okay? Now, moving on to the second type of research design we'll talk about today, that's variable-centered correlational research designs. Now, correlation is really simple. We all understand that correlations are the relationships between two variables. Positive correlation means that as one increases, so does the other. Negative correlation means that as one increases, the other decreases. So when using these types of designs, we're looking at the relationships between different variables. We look at a few different things. One is simultaneous and hierarchical regression. So this is when we're looking at more than one variable. Now, when we're looking at different variables and trying to figure out what the relationship between them is, we can use a simultaneous regression. This is where we would enter all of the variables in at the same time in the regression equation, because we want to figure out the amount of variability that each of these predictor variables is going to have on the prediction of the criterion variable. Now, if we had some type of theory or some type of rationale as to why we thought one variable might have a different impact than others, then we would use a hierarchical regression where predictor variables would be entered in a specific order based on that theory or rationale. And when doing that, you would look at moderation and mediation. So moderators are variables that change the predict change the relationship between the predictor and criterion variables, whereas mediators are variables that explain how or why one variable predicts a criterion variable. And the last research design that I'll discuss today is person-centered research designs. Now, person-centered research designs look at the pupil rather than the variables. So the first type of this design is cluster analysis. A cluster analysis will put people into subgroups or subtypes of people so that we can look at their individual differences. Now, a different type of design is a latent class or profile analysis. What this does is it identifies the natural groupings between people and then calculates the probability that an individual would belong in any specific group. Can be used when your indicators are continuous or when they are categorical. And the last of these is the growth mixture model. And this is an analysis that identifies subgroups based on how a variable changes over time. So it would be looking to identify not just that the variable exists, but how a variable may change with these people over time. And so that is my take on these qualitative research designs. I hope this was helpful to you. This information in this presentation was presented from the Heppner Research Design and Counseling Tech. Here's the reference here. Thank you so much for watching.
Moving on to Chapter 15, Single Subject Designs, we're going to be looking at the case for why you would use one of these designs, what it is, single subject experimental designs in particular. Then we'll look at some concerns and some contributions about them. As we look at the case for why you'd use a single subject design, Psalm 139 really comes to mind. This whole psalm is just about how God has created us so uniquely and individually, and He knows us inside and out. And in psychology and counseling, we want to study humankind. We want to understand one another, and often we do this by comparing groups or trying to get large sample sizes. But actually, we are each so unique and so individual that really taking time to understand each person's story and to see the intricacies as God created us is a really powerful thing to do. And this is kind of leads into just the case that it actually responds to the uniformity myth, which says that it's the tendency to consider all members of a category as more similar than they really are, ignoring their differences. And many times by doing only group comparisons, we miss these little intricacies and some of these unique differences. Also, in a counseling setting, we have easier access to individuals or small groups. That's something we're seeing and doing every day without having to search for large sample sizes. And it provides a rich understanding of individuals and treatments, much richer understanding. Single subject designs are looking at variables within the same subject over a period of time through repeated observations of these variables. And some of the reasons that they aren't as common today are because of perhaps some not very systematic ways that they've been done in the past that led to a lot of methodological issues, and it kind of made it seem like it was unscientific. For example, the uncontrolled case study, where there's an observation of client, but it's unsystematic, uncontrolled in retrospect, or even if it is more systematic, they tend to have a lot of error in those things. But actually, we do have a great option for single subject designs, and that's experimental designs that are measuring the independent or the dependent variable repeatedly over time, but introducing different treatment phases. under experimental conditions. And so you would need to get a stability of a baseline data and then introduce a treatment phase. So for example, the A-B experimental design, you would have your baseline phase, and then after a certain number of sessions, when that baseline seems to be established, you would introduce the treatment. And there, even from this graph, you can see we look at that and we start to think, the treatment may be causing these, the differences here. However, there are threats to internal validity with this design, such as history or maturation. So you can add another phase that would be a withdrawal or reversal phase, where you would remove the treatment, and then there you would expect to see a change as well in those observations. So this is the ABA experimental design, and however, with anything like this, once you introduce a treatment, you'll tend to have carryover effects, and there's lack of replication. There's still a few things that don't make this very solid. So an ABAB design is it continues to take shape. And this is where we add a fourth phase, where we reintroduce the treatment phase, and this helps to replicate it, but it's still going to have carryover effects. If you want to deal with the carryover effects, you can use a randomized A/B design, and this helps to address it. But actually, with both of these, there are ethical concerns anytime you're withdrawing a treatment that's actually working successfully on a client. And so if there are ethical concerns, one of the things that you can do instead of those designs would be a multiple baseline design. And this is the replication of the A/B experiment across participants, settings, or behaviors. And basically you're staggering then the introduction of the intervention phase, and you're eliminating the carryover effects of this, and using these multiple baselines as almost as a control for one another, but it can be a lengthy process. So the concerns we mentioned, carryover effects are a big thing to consider. Also, internal validity threats. There are ethical considerations with withdrawing treatment, and generalizability to other individuals or situations. We can't really necessarily generalize these things, but there are a lot of contributions that these studies can bring, and that is, as we drill down deeper in some of these ideas, we get a microscopic analysis. We also get to test. It's a great thing for testing new therapeutic techniques or methodology. It's a means to study rare phenomena, going back to those differences, unique differences, and it can counter or support existing findings. So it does great to complement the current research that's out there. So that's chapter 15.